Welcome to this new video. This will be the first in this series, and it's about instructional design. By the end of this video, you're going to have basic understanding of instructional design, the components, the principles, and general information, general understanding about how to design an instruction. So by the end of this particular video, you're going to be able to explain what an instruction is. You're going to be able to talk about systems. You're going to be able to, talk about the components of an instructional system, and you're going to be able to talk about the process involved in designing an instruction. So let's get into the video. First, I'm going to talk to you about the role of the teacher in the classroom and or in an instructional system. One of the hallmark qualities of an expert, of a teacher, an expert teacher, is the ability to design and develop an instructional system. So this goes beyond simple lecturing. It is general knowledge that a teacher teaches. But then, what a teacher does that even the teacher does not or probably may not know that he or she does is that they design an instructional system. So it's beyond, just lecturing, and it requires deep knowledge of how components like objectives, contents, and environment, in fact, including the learners that they are going to class to teach, organize into a cohesive whole. So, learning these principles transforms a content resource into a learning facilitator. So, a teacher now goes beyond being a content, resource, being someone who writes lesson notes, into someone who facilitates a class, someone who facilitates a learning process, an instructional process. So, what is an instruction? An instruction can be defined in two ways. One is through the structured learning, and the other one is through purposeful activity. So, when you talk about instruction, we're talking about two major things. We're talking about structured learning. We're also talking about purposeful activities. Instruction can be defined or described as the process of helping people learn. So, when you help people learn, you are passing or you are going through the process of what instruction, you are passing instruction. So, when you instruct a person, for example, you instruct a child not to touch a hot plate, you are telling the child that it could burn him or her. It is not good, it is not appropriate to touch a hot container or a hot object with their bare hands. So what do you do in the process of instruction? You rather tell you either tell the child not to touch the hot plate, or you give the child a cushion, an insulator to hold, to put in between their hand or their palm and that hot plate. Thereby, through that you are teaching the child how to go about touching an hot object in a way that they will not get injured. So the child next time knows that a hot object can injure them, and how to go about touching such an object is to use a cloth or an insulator, something that could protect their palm against such danger. So that is learning, structured learning. Structured learning also is a way of helping people develop in a structured manner, spanning cognitive, emotional, social, physical, and even spiritual domains. So learning don't just take place in the physical domain. Learning takes place in the mental space, the cognitive, the emotional, in fact, the spiritual domain, which is often less emphasized. So because Life is spiritual. Then the second method by which you can define instruction is through the purposeful activities that you select as a teacher for your learners. So, what do I mean? Instruction can be described as a set of events embedded in purposeful activities that facilitate learning. So these events can be external to the learner. For example, events embodied in printed pages, an instructor's lecture, or the activities of a group of students. There are also the internal mental events such as directing attention, rehearsing, reflecting, and monitoring progress. So these are the ways by which we can define an instruction. What am I saying? We're saying that an instruction is a process of helping people learn, in a structured manner through a carefully selected set of activities, which could be internal or external. Now let's move on. How does learning happen? Learning typically happens through clustering information. Educational psychologists they note that working memory has limited capacity, and instructional designers apply this principle by organizing information into clusters. Instruction includes external events, lectures, printed pages, and internal mental events, which might include reflecting and monitoring progress to maximize opportunities for acquisition. So, what we're saying here is that instructional designers don't act in isolation. As a teacher, you are also applying your understanding of human psychology and psychology of learning in designing your lesson process, your instructional process. So, what you're saying is you leverage learning theories that have established that working memory has limited capacity. So, because the working memory of human beings is limited, then you are to ensure that you take advantage of this limited capacity to deliver memorable instruction. So, what do you do in this process? You cluster information, you use information that are alike, and that is why a good teacher knows that learning must take place from simple to complex, from known to unknown. You don't just start from what your learner cannot relate with. You start where they are comfortable, where you start from concepts that your learners can easily interact and understand and relate with. So, what is the difference between teaching and learning? Teaching implies the process of lecturing or demonstrating. It is only one part of a broader instructional process. So, what is the role of a teacher in this process, in this part? Content resource and managing class time. Then the second part of the instructional process is learning, a natural process that leads to changes in knowledge and behavior. It can occur without formal instruction. Then what happens in this part? Intentional modification of capability as a result of experience. So learning is the result of learning is an intentional modification of capabilities as a result of experience. So when you are encountered knowledge, after an instructional process, for example, after a class, after a training, what do you expect? You have an expectation before even conducting the training, which is called you can call it learning expectation, you can call it learning objectives. So this is what you expect that by the end of this training, your learners, your trainees should be able to exhibit certain or characteristics. So and by the time they begin to exhibit that or such characteristics, you say that learning had taken place. You say that this is the result of the training we organized at a particular point in time. So when learning takes place is when your learners, your trainees, your employees, whatever whoever they are, whatever class of people they are, they begin to exhibit, the modification that you have attempted to conduct. So what is a system? What then is a system? A system is a collection of elements or components working together cooperatively to achieve predetermined goals. So, a system is a collection of components that are meant to cooperatively work together to achieve a predetermined objective or goal. So what is the classification? How do we classify a system? A system can be classified into natural or and man-made, systems. So on natural systems are systems like the human body, the solar energy system, the water cycle or the water system that function organically in nature. We can even call them renewable systems. So natural systems are systems that are not synthetic. They are made by nature. They are not human made. What about the man-made systems? An example of them is the political system, the educational system, the vehicular system, and so on. These are systems that are organized by human beings, that are produced by human beings, that are produced by human beings. They are man-made, as the name implies. What other classification? A system can also be classified by the size. We call this we call these two classifications subsystem and supra-system. So what is a subsystem? A subsystem is a part or a subset of a total system designed for a specific purpose. A subsystem is a part of a system, of a total system, or it is a subset of a complete system that is designed for a specific purpose. So, what is an example of a subsystem? We have the school system within the larger educational system. So, you can see on the screen that we have the school, and the school is subsumed is a subset of an educational system. The function of the school is to enroll students and then to give them structured learning for them to be able to contribute to their society. So there are other systems in the educational system. The school is just one of them. So what about the sopran system? A sopran system is a larger entity or an environment in which a system exists. So we can say a sopran system houses a subsystem. So a subsystem is a kind of system that stays or that functions under, or within a bigger system, which is known as the supra system. So a subsystem is a system that functions within the environment that is called the supra system. So what is an example of this? We have the society. Our society is a supra system of the educational system. The school functions within the educational system, while the educational system functions within the society as a whole. So we can say that our society, our state, our our society is a supra system. We can also say that our educational system is a supra system for the school. Of course, also, we can say that our society is a supra system for a subsystem called the educational system. All right, so let's make progress. So we can then describe an instructional system as a systematic way or a systematic way of planning, designing, and evaluating the entire teaching process to produce desirable outcomes. So a system is a collection of parts or components. Now, an instructional system can be said to be a collection of parts, that work together through planning, designing, and evaluating an entire teaching process to produce desirable outcomes. So, what are the core components of an instructional system? The core components of an instructional system, as described on screen, include the instructional objectives, which are like the learning outcome, the expectation of an instructional process, the learning content, which is the subject matter, what you intend to teach, how you intend the message you intend to pass across in order to be able to achieve the learning or instructional objectives. Then we also have the instructional environment. This is the context, the place, the context, the reality of the learners, where the instructional content will be disseminated to then we have the learner. The learner is the core component of an instructional system, without whom nothing can take place. No instruction can take place without the learner. So, with the learner, they are also classified as the target audience. Then we have the teacher. The teacher is the facilitator, is also the subject matter expert of an instructional system. So the teacher understands the subject matter, owns the content or collects the content or creates the content. The teacher decides the instructional objectives. The teacher, in some cases, decides the instructional environment and then decides the instructional method. That is the strategy, the mode by which the instructional content will be communicated or will be disseminated to the learner. Then also decides the media. So the media is the delivery tool, is the tool that will be used to deliver the instructional content. So we have the diagram here, and we have the learner at the middle, at the center of it all. So the learner is the one for whom the system is designed. So finally, we have an instructional system design, and this is a systematic process of developing instructional specifications using learning and instructional theories to ensure quality. So, an instructional system design does not work in isolation. Does not just It's not just a process of bringing students to class. It involves understanding theories, learning theories, and instructional theories. It involves understanding models and frameworks that can assure or ensure quality output. So it involves analyzing the needs, what needs, the needs of the learners, the needs of the society, the needs of the school. It involves developing materials or exercises in form of electronic content, in form of written notes, in form of podcasts, in form of videos for learners, and finally evaluating the progress to meet specific goals. So we can see that an instructional design or is an instructional system design. I called it instructional design on purpose because you can either call it an instructional system design or you can shorten it and call it an instructional design. Is a flow of activities from analysis to development to evaluation. And you can further expand this flow to start from analysis to design to development, and then you will have implementation in between design and evaluation, because the means when you get to class or an instructional environment to disseminate information. You are there to implement the information you have collected through analysis, design, and development. And after implementing, you have to evaluate, you have to check whether what you have done is achieving its purpose or not. So that is what we call evaluation. You also want to check the material you have developed, whether it is quality material or it does not meet up to quality. So you check for quality so quality control, and you check for eligibility and so many things. So you evaluate the material you have developed. So in this video, I've been able to talk to you about an instruction. You have an idea of what an instruction is, you have an idea of what a system is, and you have an idea of what an instructional system design is. So if you have any questions or you want to attempt the questions on screen, you can put them in the comment section. I'll respond, and other person can also comment, and let's interact. Thank you.